Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Dear students, let us come back and discuss about the geometric design features, where we have started with module 2, which was related with cross sectional elements, and after discussing about the various common elements, we started with the specific elements which needs to be provided on any of the cross section, specifically in urban areas, and in that we discussed bicycle facilities, and then we started with the pedestrian facilities. And under the pedestrian walking facilities, we have primarily tried to look at the concepts which can be there and the design principles which needs to be followed when the various types of pedestrian facilities are designed or planned or are provided in an area. Now, in today's interaction, we are going to continue with the pedestrian walking facilities, and we are going to talk about not only those design principles which we have discussed in the previous interaction, but will also take up the design aspects in terms of the width of the facility, height of the facility, the designs at an intersection and so, and then we will follow with the walking speeds to be considered, level of service and the facility environment. Now, when we are talking about these things, then what are the various specific aspects needs to be taken care of? You should try to take note of those particular things. Now, in this slide, what is being talked is the way the provision of different type of required aspects have been provided or associated features have been provided all along the footpath or a sidewalk. What you can see here that there is a footpath being provided like this. There is a separate facility here, and this particular space which is being provided is having all those electric poles etc. And when these electric poles are provided, then there is a buffer on this side as well as a buffer on the other side. When this pedestrian is walking on this facility, then obviously this pedestrian is going to maintain certain buffer with respect to the wall being provided on the side. They are not going to walk very close to the walk. So, this particular aspect we have discussed. We talked about the shy distance, and that needs to be taken care of. Another aspect is that when these people are walking, as we can see that there is a one thing which is being provided just at the edge of the footpath here, maybe in the buffer area. And when we look at the heights of the things being provided here, there needs to be a clear vertical clearance between these two things, the height of the pedestrian versus the bottom of the thing which is being provided at any location. So, that sort of clearance is also important here. And so, as to make the things distinct, one another thing which is being done is the use of texture. So, you have one texture here and you have another texture on the other side, which is very clearly defining that how these facilities or the things needs to be utilized. When we look at on this particular photograph, there is a bicycle facility along with the pedestrian facility. Again, if you look at the two different textures are being used so as to clearly define or demarcate that which particular area is to be utilized by whom. There is a green patch on this side and a green patch on the other side. So, a physical segregation with respect to the motorized movements on either of the side has also been taken care of. There is a provision of access from the carriageway side, and as well as the things can be provided at another location to the another side of the development. So, that is another type of facility being provided. The designing of the sides is being done in such a manner that there is a possibility of a parking of a vehicle, because the adequate width has been provided on this side. So, that is being utilized to provide some parking spaces, and what you can find is that this is a total continuous space being provided. So, it is a connected continuous space which is provided for the pedestrians to walk comfortably on that. So, these are the things we are trying to look at. Here, in continuation of our discussion with the pedestrian facilities, we are talking specifically about the height and width of a sidewalk. As you can see in this photograph, a sidewalk is being provided. So, there is a width of the sidewalk, there is a height of the sidewalk, and we have the carriageway along the sidewalk here, and at the back side there is a wall. So, this height of the footpath, that should not be more than 150 mm, and usually we keep it as 150 mm from the carriageway level. So, this is the carriageway level, from there we are putting it this value, and this is a standard value which is being used as a riser for the public steps. Then the another thing is the width. This width has to be minimum 2000 mm, that is being provided, that has to be provided here. But when you are talking about this width, we have to keep it in mind that this value which we are talking is effective width. The reason being that if you are coming very near to this wall, obviously you are going to maintain some buffer. So, when you are maintaining that some buffer width, and this buffer width may change from 0.5 meters to 1 meters depending on what type of buffer is there. So, that should not be considered within the width of the footpath which is being provided there. So, if we are having say a buffer of 1 meter and you have to provide 2 meter wide footpath, it means total width which should be available is 3 meters at this location. One another case which is being talked here is that there may be restricted conditions in the built up areas where you are not in a position to provide these 2000 mm of the width along with the buffer which can be say 1000 mm. So, in those conditions what should be done? In that, this is the condition can be applied. What it says is that if the width is less than say 1800 mm, then the provision of passing spaces 1800 mm wide and 2500 mm long shall be made at reasonable frequencies. So, that means we are going to have a width which is lesser than that, but at some position we need to provide higher width in this form. So, we have a minimum 1800 and then this length is going to be 2500 mm, and that is the location where the under the constraint conditions the pedestrians will be crossing. Now, when you have the right of way which is less than 10 meters, as I was saying, then in that case the absolute minimum can become 1500 mm. But now, this particular width is also going to be dependent on the type of development which is there in an area. We talked about a bus stop as an example, and where we said that we have a wider sidewalk available or a narrower sidewalk available. So, in the case of bus stops, it says that we should try to have at least 3 meters wide footpath being available, which is being utilized both for the pedestrian movement who has nothing to do with the bus stop and the people who are standing at the bus stop in terms of the width of the shelter. If we are in a commercial area or we are in a shopping area or we are in a high intensity commercial areas, one thing which is being common is that we need to provide a dead width or a buffer width of 1 meters. Depending on that what type of facilities or what type of activities are going to be there in an area, the widths are also varying from 2.5 meters to 4 meters in width. Here we are talking about the vertical clearance with respect to the surface of the footpath. As you can see in this photograph or a diagram, a value of 2.4 meter has been shown. If you see in the another one which is being given on the right hand side, there is a projection which is coming out of a built up area, and this projection is actually the obstruction. So, any person who is walking as a pedestrian on this footpath, there should be a minimum clearance which should be available, otherwise the person may hit there and there may be a problem, there may be a casualty, there may be some hazardous situation. Keeping that in mind, a minimum vertical clearance of 2400 mm has been talked from the top of the footpath to the bottom of the whatever obstruction which is coming out of any development. So, this is one another thing we have to keep it in mind, and of course, in this particular one what you can see is that there is a dead space which is being talked. As I said, it can be 0.5 meter, it can be 1 meter, there is a walking area which is the effective width which should be minimum 2 meters wide, and then there is some other area which can be used for plantation, which can be used for the seating of say the elderly people, women or children who are using these facilities, and this can be defined as multi utility zone or multi functional zone, and the width of this is also to be taken care of, and in that case it can be under the constraint conditions as low as 500 mm, but desirably we should go for 2000 mm width and for the multi utility zone or MUZ. Now, here in continuation of the width and the height which we have talked, now what we are talking here is that connectivity of the footpath with the carriageway. Say in this case you can see that there is a footpath here and there is a carriageway being provided on this side. So, there is a width which is 150 mm. Now, the people who are having certain restrictions in their movement, they may find it difficult. So, come down to 150 mm and therefore, we should provide a ramp, and that is the way the felicitation of the movement should be taken care of. Now, in the another one what we can see is that the footpath is moving in this direction and the footpath is moving in the other direction also, but at this point where this is a corner, we are going through the ramp in this direction as well as in this direction. Now, the gradient of this ramp shall be 1 in 15, or it should not be greater than 1 in 15, means we are trying to provide as flat as possible considering the universal accessibility criteria. At the same time, when you are using this footpath, what we can see is that this footpath is going down and similarly it is going down here. It means there is some flaring happening, and this flaring is being shown in another diagram on the right hand side. So, this is a flared section, and for this flaring the gradients are being used as 1 in 10. And at this point when the pedestrian is coming down along this ramp, say you can see on the right hand side the number of tiles have been shown, but if you see in the central one there is a tile which is coming across the direction of movement. These are the tactile warning tiles which should be provided so as to warn the visually impaired or differently abled people that now they are approaching something which is maybe hazardous and they have to be cautious here. One another aspect which needs to be taken care of is that when you are trying to provide this type of a system at this location, a minimum width of 1200 mm should be available at the back of the ramp, so that the pedestrians can pass in the two directions. The two pedestrians can use this particular width of 1200 mm simultaneously. Now, when we look at the corner at a junction, then we also need to see that when you are going to provide this type of facility and you provide it at a 90 degrees, then probably it is not so conducive even for the vehicles to negotiate this curve. So, we need to provide some radius here, and this radius is being talked as a maximum as 12 meters and can be reduced to 6 meters in the residential areas. So, this is a type of thing we are trying to provide here. Now, when we are looking at this type of an aspect and when we are looking at this facility as a footpath, so the connectivity with the carriageway as well as the turning at this aspect and then the straight sections on either side of this one. So, here with respect to the drainage, we have to see whether we need to provide any slope here or not. And if you remember, we talked about these slopes when we were discussing about the cambers as one of the cross sectional elements. But one thing which can be there at a minimum level is that we can provide that slope as 1 in 50 and 1 in 100. So, that is the value which can be provided in these cases. Here we are talking about the surface and connectivity of the pedestrian facility. You can see in this photograph a wide pedestrian facility has been provided and a child is playing at the top of that, using maybe that this is the home of this girl child and she is utilizing it very perfect manner. But when you are trying to provide this, what we can see is there are these gaps which will be there because we are utilizing the tiles, and similarly there are going to be gaps here. So, in the longitudinal direction as well as in the transverse direction, these gaps will be there. So, the first point what it says is that if there are any gaps in the surface due to drainage passage, that shall not be wider than 10 mm and should be perpendicular to the direction of movement. So, whatever this gap position is there, this should not be more than 10 mm, and water should be provided in such a manner that the water drains along this and just goes away from the surface in the perpendicular direction. That means, if a drain is being provided here, then this water will get into that drain which is provided alongside the curb. Another important thing is that when you are utilizing, when you are walking on this particular surface, and if there are two tiles which are provided in this form. So, we just talked about this gap 10 mm. But the another thing, another important aspect is there a deviation or difference between the level of these two tiles which have been placed side by side. And if this is more than 5 mm, then that is going to be a problem. The person lag will hit at this point, and again it may create a movement disorder. So, that should be taken care of. The next thing which we can talk here is the walking speed. Now, walking speeds have been defined by Indian Road Congress in its own guidelines, that is IRC 103, as well as we have Highway Capacity Manual of India which came up in 2017. So, there also the values have been specified, and what you can see is that these values have been specified now for different categories of the users. So, we have adult man and woman, we have people who are going to utilize our facilities by way of different assistive devices, or we have the people who are moving around with the small children, the toddlers, the infant, and therefore, the speeds are going to be furthermore restricted. So, what we found is that as the type of restrictions are increasing, the speeds, the walking speeds are also going to be reduced. So, we can have a value of something like 1.2 meters per second if we are looking at the population, adult population in terms of man and woman together. But when we are going in the case of those people who are having toddlers of something like 0 to 2 years or 2 to 3 or 3 to 5 years, what we found is that it is in the range of 0.25 to 0.6 meters per second. And the values have also been defined for the different type of residential areas or a commercial areas or a recreational areas or institutional areas, and here what we find is it is highest in the case of residential area, and in the recreational area it is the lowest value which is being defined as meters per minute. So, the two values here which we have seen that they are being shown as either meter per second or meter per minute. So, the environment in which the facility has been provided is also going to make a difference in terms of the way the people are going to use it or walk on it. Now, whenever we talk about a facility, the discussion probably is not going to be completed unless and until we have talked about the level of service which that particular facility is going to impart to its users, and that can be in terms of the quantity which it is going to be able to handle, or in terms of the quality which it is going to provide to its user. So, two things can be there, the quantity and the quality. Now, when we are talking about the quantities, those quantities can be in terms of the width of the facility, it can be in terms of the number of obstructions which are going to be there on the path which is being marked for the movement of pedestrians. So, that can be in terms of an encroachment from the side, or the continuity or discontinuity of a facility which is being provided, and we talked about it that if there is a problem with it, then people are not going to utilize it. So, the quantifications can be there in terms of whether it is a 1 meter wide surface or a 2 meter wide surface or a 4 meter wide surface, and what is the amount of pedestrian flow which is there, whether it is adequate enough or not to take care of it. So, the flow is one parameter which may be there. The speed can be another parameter which can be there, or when we are talking about this, then the one more thing which we talk is the amount of space which is available per pedestrian which is being provided on a facility when the total flow is coming on it. When we are looking at the user, then the user is more inclined to see whether the use is comfortable or not, whether the safety and security is being maintained on that particular facility, and when they are using it, how easier it is in terms of its design that they can use it, whether it is convenient enough or not. So, all of these parameters can be talked in terms of qualitative features. So, when we are looking at these aspects and when we are saying that they are going to be users and they can be defined by way of their gender also. So, they are going to occupy some space on the footpath or a sidewalk, and Indo-SCMs provides a body ellipse of the pedestrians. So, what it can say is that this can be the total body. So, this is a width in this sense, and that can be the depth of the body with respect to the movement. Okay, so, that sort of a condition we are trying to look at. But then there are two cases being talked here, one is with baggage and another one is without baggage. Say if you have a pack at the back, then what you find is that this depth is going to increase. So, now it becomes something like this, or if you are carrying something in hand, then the width is going to increase on the other side. Looking at those aspects, what is being observed is that if you take it the combined conditions of male and female, then what this the area which is going to be there, that is 0.2080 meter square when there is a baggage being carried, and when there is no baggage being carried, then it can be as low as 0.14 meter square. So, this thing when you are talking about total width of a footpath, so how many such people can be there on that is going to be dependent is what is the width of that facility being provided. So, in that sense this level of service of the sidewalk is being defined, and this is being defined here as you can see from A to F. So, categorization is there. When you are looking at A, as we discussed previously also, it defines the highest level which can be there, whereas F defines the lowest level. Two of the flow characteristics which are being talked here is one is the pedestrian space, another one is the flow rate. So, what you find is that the spaces which are available in the category A are quite high, they are roughly around 5 meter square per pedestrian, but when you talk about the level F, it is much lesser than even 1 meter square per pedestrian. And when you are looking at the flow rate also, then there is very less flow, but here you find that the flow has increased a lot in terms of pedestrians per meter per minute. Now, when we look at these level of service in the sidewalks, usually we work in the area of B and C. So, when we are working in the area of B and C, that the values which have been defined for different widths of the footpaths are also being mentioned here. So, what you can find is that there are two things which being talked here. One is that the movement is in both the directions, another one is that the movement is only in one direction. And again we are looking at LOS B and LOS C. So, if you remember, we talked about the flow characteristics, and in those flow characteristics we also talked about the level of service, and we said that if there is a speed here and there is a flow here, so this is the maximum flow which can be there, and that is somewhere around the free flow speed. Now, when we are looking at this LOS B and LOS C, then this LOS B is somewhere going to be something here, but when you are looking at LOS C, then it is going to be something like this, where what we say is that this is you found is that 50% and 70% are the values which are there in terms of the Q maximum. So, when we are looking at these things and we talk about a value of 1350 as a number of persons per hour for a width of 1.8, and we are going to convert it to a level of service C, then what we are going to do is that it is being multiplied by a factor 1.4, that is 0.70 divided by 0.50. And when we are looking at the conversion from the both direction to the one direction, then this is being multiplied by 1.5. So, whatever the values are there, if you convert it, so it means if you have an idea of only this one particular case, you can very easily deduce the rest of the cases. And here also there is a sort of a symmetrical conditions which you can try to make it out. So, if you say that you are talking about 2 meters versus 3 meters, the change is of 900 persons per hour for that one particular meter width which is being added, and then this can further be classified and defined in terms of the conversions to level of service C or the one directional or both directional conditions. In this case, again we are talking about the level of service B or C, but then what you found is that we are now specifically talking about different type of developments which are there in which these facilities are being provided. There is not much difference which you can see in terms of the pedestrians per hour per meter and the values which have been defined for both directions. So, what you can see is that the minimum value which is coming at LOS B is in the institutional areas, and similarly obviously in LOS C also it is going to be for that. But when talking about the higher values, then those higher values for LOSC, they are coming in this domain of residential area, recreational area or the terminals which are being provided and where these facilities have been located. Now, let us come to the facility environment, and in the case of this facility environment, it is quite important that the way the things have been provided and placed, people are going to be stimulated to use those particular facilities. So, what you see here, there is a very good development being shown in this photograph, where there is some space which is already being defined that yes, the people are not going to utilize it. There is another space which is dedicated to different type of features to be provided on the side of the footpath, and then we have the space which is free, in which the persons can just simply move around. So, this is the way we can try to develop the things. So, here you can see that frontage area, clear sidewalk, street furniture or buffer or utility zones, they have been defined across the width of the things apart from the parking or the carriageway being utilized for the motorized vehicles. The another case here, we already discussed about it in terms of the spaces being dedicated for different type of uses, and the same is being portrayed here in this photograph, which is also from the southern city, where you can see the dead zone, the multi utility or the functional zone, as well as the pedestrian walking zone very clearly being defined and being marked and being separated out, or also being protected by way of the provision of the bollards, so that no vehicular movement takes place on this particular facility. Here in this case, again the multi utility or the multi functional zone is being provided, which is being separated out from the carriageway. There is a wide footpath being provided here, the sitting spaces are there. So, everything is being provided in perfect manner. Here also what we can see is that a lot of space is being dedicated for the movement of the pedestrians, and the restricted space is being provided for the movement of the motorized vehicles, and within this wide space, the space is being created for the parking of the vehicles, because there is a lot of development or the activity area on the site. So, this is another thing which we have to take care of. But when we are talking about some specific type of facilities which needs to be provided, say there is a telephone line which is to be provided, or optical fiber line is going to be there, or the water line is going to be there, then the verge is one thing which we have discussed, and here what it says is that it can be minimum 500 mm wide, and desirably it can be 1500 to 2000 mm wide. So, that is the value which we can provide in these cases, and all of these things, if systematically being provided, make it livable in that area. Here again the designs have been shown, and what you can see is that this is a connectivity being provided across this particular facility, that is the footpath. So, the vehicles can move in this direction, but what we have done is that this level has been maintained. So, the level is same. So, here the ramp is being provided on this side or this side, and the ramp slope is 1:8 for the vehicles. So, the vehicles which are coming from this direction and going to the property, and say here it is a carriageway. So, this is the way it can be done, but at the same time their movement toward this side or this side has been restricted by way of the provision of the bollards. And what you can see is that there is a certain spacing between the bollards here and here. So, this particular spacing can be utilized by the person who is on a wheelchair, and this another one can be utilized by a person who is just simply walking. So, that is another aspect being taken care of. Here also there is some development being provided on the side of the footpath, and the level difference are clearly marked. So, it is 150 mm difference between the two. The ramp is being provided at a slope of 1:8, and so the property area is being provided on this side. So, a gate is there and the vehicles can get into on that. There can also be a possibility that we have to get down to the level of the carriageway or to some other level, is lesser level. So, here what you see is that though the ramp is being provided, but the level difference between the carriageway and the footpath is only 50 mm as compared to 150 mm on this side, and that is where a ramp is provided for the pedestrians also, which is 1:12 to 1:15 as we discussed. And here very clearly, as you can see, the tiles are being provided for the differently abled people. So, this connectivity towards the property is there, and then the multiple level of tiles are there along with the bollards, just to specify that what type of movement is going to be there. This is an integrated and assisted system in terms of the way the warning tiles or the guiding tiles are being provided, so as to define in which direction people should move, and they are placed usually 600 away from the edge of the curve. Here different type of users are there, so the spacing of bollards needs to be taken care of. This is a parking area on this side, and the height of these bollards can be 0.5 to 0.7 meters above the surface of the footpath. Here again what you can see is that the cycle track is also being provided. There is a movement in this direction to the property, so access to the property is there, and these are the designs which we have discussed previously. The same things are there. The only thing is that this level is being maintained at the same one, that is 150 above the carriageway. And if you are talking about the cycle track, this cycle track is 100 above the carriageway, and we did discuss about this when we talked about the bicycle facilities. This is again the integrated system where we are also talking about the parking of vehicles. So, whatever that space is being provided, some additional space which is being used as a multifunctional zone, there the vendors are also there, and some space is being dedicated to the parking of vehicles. This can be for motorized two wheelers, or this can be for the cars, etc., but if it is for cars, then that should be parallel to the curb side. So, this is one aspect being looked at. So, with this we stop our interaction today, and we will be continuing with the other things related to either the pedestrians or whatever is being left in this particular module in the next interaction. Till then, thank you and goodbye.